I'm a crime scene cleaner, but some stains are not of this world. The blood wouldn't come out. I'd been scrubbing for 3 hours using every chemical in my van, every technique I'd learned in 15 years of crime scene cleanup. But the stain on the hardwood floor of the Riverside mansion only seemed to grow darker, spreading like spilled ink against the grain of the wood. My name is Sarah Chen, and I run Chen's Restoration Services in Portland, Oregon. I've cleaned up after suicides, homicides, accidents, and natural deaths. I've seen human bodies in every state of decomposition, dealt with every bodily fluid imaginable, and removed brain matter from ceiling fans more times than I care to count. Nothing shocks me anymore, or so I thought, until the Riverside job. The call came in on a Tuesday evening. Detective Ray Morrison, an old contact from the Portland PD, said they needed their best cleaner for a sensitive case. Triple homicide, he said, but something was off about it. The forensics team had finished processing the scene, but they were spooked. Wouldn't say why. I arrived at the mansion at dusk. The October sky already darkening behind the towering pines that surrounded the property. The house was a massive Victorian all-turrets, and gingerbread trimmed the kind of place that looked haunted even on sunny days. Police tape crossed the front door like a warning. Morrison met me on the porch. His usually steady demeanour cracked with something I'd never seen before: fear. "Sarah, thanks for coming," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Listen, this one's different. The victims, the Blackwood family, they were found in the parlour, but the blood patterns, they don't make sense." "Blood never makes sense," I said, pulling on my protective suit. "That's why you call me." He grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. "I'm serious. We've had 3 different forensic analysts look at it. The blood, it's moving, even now 4 days after the murders." I laughed, thinking he was joking. Morrison didn't joke about crime scenes. "Moving blood is just coagulation and gravity," I explained. "Sometimes it seems to shift as it dries, especially on certain surfaces. This isn't that." His grip tightened. "Just be careful in there. And if anything seems wrong, get out. Call me immediately." I pulled free, annoyed by his dramatics. "Ray, I've been doing this since before you made detective. I'll be fine." How wrong I was. The moment I stepped into the house, I felt it. The air was thick, almost syrupy, and tasted of copper, and something else, something organic and wrong. My equipment seemed heavier than usual as I made my way to the parlour, following the forensic markers and evidence tags. The Blackwood family had been wealthy old Portland money, stretching back to the timber boom. The parlour reflected their status, all mahogany furniture and Persian rugs, or it had before the murders. Now it was a charnel house. 3 bodies had been found here: patriarch Charles Blackwood, his wife Margaret, and their adult son James. According to Morrison's brief, they'd been killed with a knife, multiple wounds each. But what struck me first wasn't the volume of blood, it was the pattern. Blood spray from violent attacks follows predictable patterns. Arterial spray arcs in specific ways, pooling behaves according to gravity and surface texture. I'd studied bloodstain pattern analysis extensively. What I saw in the Blackwood parlour defied every principle I knew. The blood formed perfect spirals on the walls, concentric circles that seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision. On the hardwood floor, instead of pooling, it had arranged itself into symbols I didn't recognise, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. And in the centre of the room where Charles Blackwood had died, the blood had formed what looked like a doorway, a rectangular outline that seemed to extend down into the floor itself. I set down my equipment and pulled out my camera, documenting everything before I began cleaning. Through the lens, the pattern seemed even more deliberate, more impossible. I'd seen blood manipulated before: killers who used their victims' blood to write messages or create sick art. But this was different. This looked like the blood had moved itself. I started with the walls, applying enzyme cleaner to break down the proteins. The blood was 4 days old. It should have been dried flaking. Instead, it was tacky, almost fresh. And as I sprayed the first spiral, I swear I heard something, a whisper just at the edge of perception. The blood didn't come off. I scrubbed harder, applied more chemicals. The spiral seemed to darken, to pulse. The whisper grew louder words in a language I didn't understand, but that made my teeth ache. I moved to another section of wall, same result. The blood wouldn't budge. Frustrated, I decided to tackle the floor patterns instead, but as I knelt beside the doorway, outlined my hand, holding the scrub brush, passed over the threshold. The brush fell through the floor. Not through a hole, the hardwood was solid. The brush simply passed through as if the wood didn't exist within that rectangular outline. I jerked back, heart hammering. The brush was gone, vanished into solid floor. I sat back on my heels, trying to process what I had seen. Stress had to be stress, or maybe chemical fumes, though I was wearing proper ventilation. I reached out cautiously, touched the floor outside the blood outline. Solid. I moved my hand over the outline itself and felt nothing. Not air, not floor, nothing. My hand seemed to stop at the surface, but I could feel a pull, gentle but insistent, trying to draw me in. I yanked my hand back and stood up. This was beyond my expertise. I'd call Morrison, tell him the scene needed more investigation before cleaning. But when I pulled out my phone, it was dead. Not powered down dead. The screen wouldn't even light up. Fine, I'd pack up and leave deal with this in the morning with backup. But as I turned to gather my equipment, I saw him. A man stood in the doorway of the parlour. Tall, gaunt, wearing what looked like a surgical apron covered in fresh blood. His face was wrong features that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves as I watched. One moment, he had 2 eyes, the next 4, then none at all. "You can see the patterns," he said, and his voice was the whisper I'd heard earlier multiplied into harmony with itself. "How wonderful. It's been so long since someone could appreciate my work." I backed away, hand moving to the knife I kept on my belt. Crime scene cleaning could be dangerous. Families sometimes returned to scenes disturbed individuals were drawn to death sites. I'd learned to protect myself. "Who are you?" I demanded, proud that my voice didn't shake. "This is a crime scene. You need to leave." He smiled, or I think he did. His face made it hard to tell. "I am the artist. This is my gallery. And you're going to help me complete my masterpiece." He moved toward me, not walking, but gliding, his feet not quite touching the floor. I drew my knife, the blade trembling in my grip. "Stay back." He laughed a sound like breaking glass. "Mundane weapons. How quaint. Do you know what the Blackwoods were trying to do, Cleaner? Do you know why they had to become my canvas?" I didn't answer, focused on keeping distance between us. "They found a book," he continued, circling me now. "An old book full of old words, words that could open doors between what is and what shouldn't be. They thought they could control what came through. They thought their money, their status, their bloodline made them special. They were wrong. You killed them. I transformed them. Their blood was the paint, their flesh the frame. Through their sacrifice, I've created something beautiful. A permanent doorway. And now I need a caretaker. Someone who understands stains, who knows that some marks can never be removed." He gestured to the patterns on the walls, and suddenly I could see them clearly. Not random spirals, but a map showing connections between this world and others. The symbols on the floor were coordinates, addresses to places that shouldn't exist, and the doorway outline that was exactly what it appeared to be. "The previous caretakers disappointed me," he said. "The police who first responded, they couldn't see the patterns at all. Just saw blood and death and chaos. But you see the design. You understand that this is intentional, meaningful. You're perfect." I ran. Not toward the front door, he was between me and that exit. I bolted deeper into the house, through a kitchen that reeked of rotting food, up a servant's staircase that creaked under my weight. Behind me, I heard him following not footsteps, but a wet, sliding sound like raw meat being dragged across floor. The second floor was a maze of bedrooms and studies. I ducked into the first open door, what looked like a library, and locked it behind me. Pressed my back to the door, trying to control my breathing. The sliding sound stopped outside, then his voice, muffled by wood but still clear. "You can't hide from purpose, Sarah Chen. You've been chosen. The patterns recognise you." I looked around the library, searching for another exit, or a weapon. The walls were lined with books, old volumes that smelled of mould and age. A desk sat by the window, papers scattered across its surface. And on those papers I saw symbols. The same symbols drawn in blood downstairs, but these were in ink carefully annotated. The Blackwoods research. I moved to the desk, scanning the pages by moonlight. They'd been studying something called the Crimson Codex, a book of rituals designed to breach the barriers between dimensions. The notes were in Charles Blackwood's neat handwriting, growing more frantic as they progressed. "The painter comes when the patterns are complete," one note read. "He exists between spaces in the gaps of reality. Blood is his medium, flesh his canvas. We must not complete the final symbol." But they had completed it, or been forced to. Another page showed a drawing of the parlour, the blood patterns sketched in detail. But there was more patterns I hadn't seen yet, extending throughout the house. The Blackwoods hadn't just been killed in the parlour, they'd been killed throughout the mansion, their blood used to create a massive work of art visible only from the right perspective. The door shuddered as something struck it. "Reading their notes won't save you," the painter said. "They thought knowledge was protection, but knowledge without power is just awareness of your doom." I grabbed the papers, shoving them into my hazmat suit. If I survived this, they might be useful. The window, I had to try the window. It was painted shut, decades of layers sealing it closed. I grabbed a heavy bookend and smashed the glass-cold October air flooding in. The drop was maybe 20 feet onto sloped roof, survivable if I was careful. The door exploded inward as I climbed onto the sill. The painter flowed into the room, no longer maintaining even a pretense of human form. He was a writhing mass of flesh, and blood faces emerging and disappearing in the roiling surface, hands reaching out with too many fingers. I jumped, hit the roof hard, felt something pop in my ankle, rolled down the slope, grabbed the gutter just before I went over, hung there for a moment, then dropped to the lawn. The impact sent fire through my injured ankle, but I forced myself up, limping toward my van. Behind me, the house screamed. Not a human scream, but the sound of reality tearing. I looked back to see the painter emerging from the broken window, his form spreading across the exterior walls like a bloodstain. "You can't leave," he called. "The patterns are in you now. You've breathed them, touched them. You're part of the artwork." I reached my van, fumbling for keys. The engine turned over on the third try, and I floored it, gravel spraying as I fishtailed down the driveway. In the mirrors, I could see the house pulsing, the painter's form spreading to encompass the entire structure. I didn't stop driving until I reached the city proper, pulling into the parking lot of an all-night diner. Only then did I check my phone. Still dead. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I needed help. Morrison, the police, someone. But when I looked at my hands, I understood what the painter had meant. My gloves were stained with the blood from the parlour, and through the translucent material, I could see the stains spreading across my skin. Not blood anymore, but the patterns, the symbols writing themselves into my flesh. I was marked, part of his canvas now. I stripped off the gloves, but the patterns remained dark lines crawling up my arms like living tattoos. They didn't hurt worse, they felt right. Like they'd always been there waiting to be revealed. A knock on my van window made me jump, a waitress from the diner looking concerned. I rolled down the window. "You okay, hun?" she asked. "You've been sitting out here for an hour." An hour. It had felt like minutes. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." She frowned, leaning closer. "Your eyes, are you sure you're all right? They look odd." I flipped down the visor mirror and bit back a scream. My eyes were wrong. The irises showed the same spiral patterns from the Blackwood house, rotating slowly. I blinked hard and they were normal again. The waitress was backing away. "Sorry," I said. "Contact lenses, new prescription." She didn't look convinced, but returned to the diner. I sat there watching the patterns crawl further up my arms and tried to think. The Blackwood notes might have answers. I pulled them out, spreading them across my passenger seat. There were references to others who'd encountered the painter. A family in Seattle in 1987, investigators in San Francisco in 1993, a cleaning crew in Eugene in 2001. Always the same pattern murders that created doorways, blood that wouldn't clean, and anyone who tried to interfere became part of the artwork. But there was hope. Charles Blackwood had found references to a reversal ritual, a way to close the doorways and banish the painter. It required 3 things: blood from the marked one, an object from the original victims, and the destruction of the pattern's heart. The pattern's heart. According to the notes, every artwork the painter created had a central point, a keystone that held the whole thing together. Destroy that, and the entire work unravelled. For the Blackwood house, the heart was in the basement, a room the police hadn't even found. I had to go back. The patterns on my arms pulsed as if approving. I could feel them trying to influence me, whispers in my head, telling me to embrace the transformation, to become a willing part of the masterpiece. I bit my lip hard enough to draw blood, using the pain to focus. First, I needed supplies. I drove to my warehouse where I kept industrial cleaning equipment. If I couldn't remove the stains, maybe I could destroy them. I loaded the van with every caustic chemical. I had acids that could eat through concrete bases, that could dissolve organic matter. And from my personal locker, a shotgun. It might not stop the painter, but it made me feel better. I also called Morrison using the warehouse landline. He answered on the first ring. "Sarah, thank God, we've been looking for you. Your van's GPS went dark 3 hours ago." "Ray, listen carefully. The Blackwood house, you need to evacuate everyone in a 5-block radius. Don't send anyone else inside." "What happened? You sound terrified." I looked at the patterns now reaching my shoulders. "I can't explain, just trust me. And Ray, if I don't call back by dawn, burn the house. Burn it to the foundation." "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" I hung up. He'd either listen or he wouldn't. I had work to do. The drive back to Riverside was surreal. The patterns had reached my neck now, and with them came visions. I saw the painter's other works houses and buildings across the country where reality was thin, where blood formed doorways to places that shouldn't exist. I saw the things that lived on the other side, creatures of impossible geometry and hungry void. And I saw what I would become if the transformation completed another extension of the painter's will, luring others to join the canvas. The Blackwood house looked different now. To my pattern-touched eyes I could see the complete artwork. Blood traces invisible to normal sight covered every surface. The house itself was just the frame the real masterpiece existed in, dimensions slightly offset from our own, a massive structure of crystallized blood and bent space. The front door stood open. An invitation. I loaded a spray tank with the strongest acid I had, slung the shotgun over my shoulder and entered. The patterns on my skin began to glow, providing light in the darkness. I could feel the painter's presence, amused by my return. "Welcome home," his voice echoed, from everywhere and nowhere. "I knew you'd come back. They always do once they're marked." I ignored him, following the Blackwood notes to find the basement door. It was hidden behind a bookshelf, in the study exactly where Charles had documented. The stairs descended far deeper than any basement should, the walls gradually transitioning from wood to something that looked like frozen blood. The heart of the pattern was a room at the bottom, circular, with walls covered in the most intricate bloodwork I'd ever seen. Every murder the painter had committed was represented here, linked together in a vast web. And at the centre, floating in a sphere of coagulated blood, was a heart. Not metaphorical, an actual human heart still beating after who knew how many years. "Magnificent, isn't it?" The painter materialised beside me, his form more stable here at the centre of his power. "My first canvas, my own heart freely given to the art. As long as it beats, the doorways remain open. As long as it beats, I persist." I unslung the acid tank. "Then I'll dissolve it." He laughed. "You could try, but look at yourself, Sarah. You're already more pattern than person. Destroy my heart and you destroy yourself." He was right. The patterns covered every visible inch of my skin now, and I could feel them inside me, rewriting my bones, my organs. I was becoming like him, a living extension of the artwork. But I'd been a cleaner for 15 years. I'd learned that some stains required sacrifice to remove. I turned the acid spray not on the heart, but on myself. The chemical hit the patterns on my arm, and the reaction was immediate. The blood marks hissed and bubbled, and pain like nothing I'd ever felt shot through me. But they were dissolving, the patterns breaking apart. The painter screamed, lunging for me. I dodged, continued spraying. My skin was burning away along with the patterns, but I could see it working. The room shook, the bloodwork on the walls beginning to run. "Stop," he commanded, and the force of it nearly drove me to my knees. "You don't know what you're doing. Without the patterns, without the doorways, things far worse than me will find other ways through." "Maybe," I gasped through the pain, "but that's tomorrow's problem." I'd covered half my body now, the patterns dissolving in acid smoke. The painter's form was destabilising faces, emerging and screaming from his mass. The heart in its sphere was stuttering its beat, irregular. With the last of my strength I turned the spray on the heart itself. The acid ate through the blood sphere, reached the ancient organ. It dissolved like tissue paper, releasing a sound that was part scream, part relief. The room exploded. Not with force, but with absence, reality snapping back into place with a thunderclap of normalcy. The painter's scream dopplered away into dimensions I couldn't perceive. The bloodwork on the walls liquefied, running down in normal patterns that obeyed physics. I collapsed the acid tank, empty my body, a ruin of chemical burns and dissolved patterns. But I was alive, and I was alone in my own skin. It took 6 hours for Morrison to find me. 6 hours of lying in that basement, feeling the house return to normal around me. The blood upstairs had liquefied too, he told me later, finally behaving like blood should. The patterns were gone, the doorway sealed. I spent 3 months in the burn ward recovering from the acid. The doctors couldn't understand how I'd survived. The extent of my injuries should have been fatal. I didn't tell them about the patterns, how even dissolved they'd left something behind. A resistance to damage or ability to see things others couldn't. Because the painter had been wrong about one thing. Destroying his heart hadn't destroyed him, just banished him. And there were other hearts out there, other houses where blood formed impossible patterns. I'd seen them in my visions, addresses burned into my memory. I reopened Chen's restoration services 6 months after the Blackwood incident, but my focus had changed. I still cleaned crime scenes, but now I looked for patterns others might miss. Blood that moved, wrong stains that wouldn't come out, geometries that hurt to perceive. In the 2 years since, I've found 7 more of the painter's works. 7 more hearts destroyed, 7 more doorways sealed. Each time the patterns marked me. Each time I dissolved them along with pieces of myself. I'm more scar tissue than skin now, but I'm still human, still fighting. Morrison helps when he can, steering me toward cases that seem wrong. He's never asked for the full truth, smart man. Some knowledge is too heavy to carry if you don't have to. The work is lonely, painful, and terrifying. I've seen things that would break most minds, fought creatures that shouldn't exist, and sacrificed parts of myself I'll never get back. But every doorway I close is a family saved, a horror prevented. Last week I got a call about a house in Seattle. Triple murder, the detective said, but something was off about the blood patterns. They needed their best cleaner. I loaded my van with acid and drove north, following highways that seemed to contract around me. The patterns under my scars pulsed, recognizing the path. Somewhere out there, the painter was working on a new masterpiece. But I'm Sarah Chen. I clean up messes, I remove stains, even the ones not of this world. The Seattle house was a Victorian all-turrets and gingerbread trim. Police tape crossed the door like a warning, or perhaps an invitation. I could already see the blood through the windows, arranged in spirals that hurt to look at directly. I put on my hazmat suit, checked my acid tanks, and prepared to destroy another piece of impossible art. The burns from the last house had barely healed, but that didn't matter. The work continued, the stains waited. And somewhere in spaces between spaces, the painter planned his next canvas, knowing I would come. We were locked in an endless dance now, creator and destroyer, artist and critic. He painted in blood and reality I erased with acid and sacrifice. Some stains couldn't be removed, only transformed. Some marks went deeper than skin, deeper than bone, all the way down to the soul, but that was okay. I'd learned to live with my scars, to find purpose in the pain. I entered the Seattle house acid tank ready and began my work. The blood was still fresh, the patterns still forming. If I was quick, I could stop this one before the doorway fully opened, before another family became paint for an insane artist's vision. The work was hard, dangerous and strange, but it was mine. I was Sarah Chen, crime scene cleaner, and some stains were not of this world, but I cleaned them anyway.